Welcome to How They Did It, a show where we take a look at the daily lives of our ancestors. Today we'll be joining the children of history to see what it was like growing up Aztec. A huge thanks to our sponsors, The Great Courses Plus, for making this video possible. The birth of a child was a momentous occasion for an Aztec family. Revered midwives would be present to provide their expertise and guidance in delivery. These women also carried out many of the important rituals accompanying a birth. When the baby emerged, the midwife would cut the umbilical cord, which would be preserved. Later, the umbilical cord was to be ritualistically placed in the hearth for a girl or on the battlefield for a boy. Presents would also be given to symbolize their future roles in society: shields and arrows for boys, spindles and weaving instruments for girls. The baby was then washed and prayed over, while the midwife greeted the infant with a long speech warning of the sorrows and dangers of life. Next, a naming ceremony was carried out where the child was bathed under the early morning sunlight of an auspicious day. Babies were given a calendar name based on the date of their first bathing, along with the personal name. Calendar names were derived from the ritual calendar cycle, with each day carrying a number and a sign such as 1 crocodile, 3 rain, and 13 reed. Each was associated with specific qualities and omens. Typically, a child would be bathed and named 4 days after their birth, but parents had some leeway to fudge the dates around a bit to get a more favorable day sign. Personal names were less restrictive and typically found inspiration in places or things. Boys might be named after animals, clothing, or personal qualities, while girls often took on more feminine titles like those of popular flowers. Once this had been completed, 4 water rites were performed. The name was shouted out by observers, and a feast was held. In their earliest years, babies would be kept at home and attended to by the family. Parents were very careful and took many steps to raise a healthy baby. Ensuring proper feeding, cleaning, and sleeping were all part of the routine, as well as several more unique considerations. One notable practice was the stretching ceremony. This occurred every 4 years and involved the pulling of children's fingers, toes, legs, noses, necks, and ears in order to stimulate growth. Other interesting customs include the following. Babies were to be protected from the direct gaze of an elderly person, which was believed to be quite powerful. No one must step over a child or risk stunting their growth. If it did occur, the perpetrator must quickly step back over them to undo the effect. There would be no playing outside on days with evil omens, and lost teeth were to be cast into mouse holes to encourage the arrival of permanent teeth. For the next 15 years, children would live at home with their families. During this time, they would be educated by their parents, their relatives, and their local community on how to be a proper Aztec. We will trace their aging by following a child's development year to year. At 3 years old, children wore simplified versions of adult clothing. The boys wore a basic cape without a breechcloth, and girls wore a tunic without a skirt, while both had their hair cut short by a priest to prevent illness. For now, they had no chores and could play much of the day. As the months rolled on, however, they were increasingly instructed on proper behavior. Soon children were expected to stop playing in the mud, to greet people properly, to listen attentively to elders, and to eat quietly. At 4 years old, gender differences became more apparent. Girls started to wear a short skirt, while boys continued rocking their capes commando style. Chores now also entered the equation. Girls began to take on domestic chores like spinning and weaving, while boys began to leave the house with their fathers to fetch supplies like water. At 5 years old, girls progressed to longer skirts while boys continued to enjoy their freedom under the hood. Chores became more routine. Girls were taught to use a spindle, and boys returned with heavier supplies like bundles of grass for brooms and wood for fireplaces. At 6 years old, their chores became more involved. Girls spent extensive time learning to weave and spin alongside their mothers, and boys made their first trip to the marketplace to collect supplies. At 7 years old, boys finally put on a dang breechcloth. Girls carried out tasks on their own under the supervision of their mothers, and boys ventured out on the lake to learn fishing and observe the activities of the boatmen. From 8 to 14 years old, the responsibilities of chores continued to increase year by year. Now, however, these activities started to be accompanied by physical punishment for bad behavior rather than mere verbal scolding. Magwai spines, for instance, were used to prick children who showed excessive lying, negligence, idleness, wild behavior, or other indiscretions. Children might also be subjected to the acrid smoke of burning chili peppers or the effects of being stretched out over damp ground all day. While these punishments may seem extreme, it's important to realize that they were not used every day. Their presence, however, does inform us of the high standards parents placed on their children. This was in keeping with Aztec society, which believed in obedience, honesty, politeness, respect, moderation, modesty, and energy as moral ideals.
So I hope you appreciated this short form look into Invicta content. Now if you want to see our full length documentaries, you can head on over to the main channel, and either way, I'll see you in the next one.